in the next half an hour or so to come, I will present the strategy to achieve renewable energy transition and how to achieve the recent most government policy targets. When I say renewable energy transition, I'm referring to there is a policy of achieving carbon neutrality by 2050. So that is the renewable energy transition that I'm referring to. And when I say GoSL policy, I'm referring to the latest policy that we received last month. Most people may not know that the 70% policy has been properly issued to us only last month, but there were indications that it is coming. The cabinet approval was received only August last year, and it was communicated that there is a policy coming our way only in September last year. So that is how recent the policy is. I'm talking, when I say policy, I'm talking about the 70% from renewable by 2030 policy. At the introduction, Dr. Lienage was referring to a policy of achieving self-sufficiency in 2030. That shows the type of policy confusion we have in the sector. There is no such policy. In fact, there was a policy like that, but that is one of the 5 policies that we had in the sector during the last couple of years. But since I am not going to talk about the policy confusion and the impact of that to planning, I will only stick to talking about the strategy to achieve the renewable energy transition and the government policy target of 70% by 2030, which I will refer to as 70-30 policy. At the beginning, sometimes you may wonder why the CEB's head of planning is talking about a strategy, whereas I should have presented my plan. But we very clearly see that if we have to go for this renewable energy transition, we have to have a very clear single strategy, and we have to align all the agencies, even all the ministries, into this single strategy. Because we very clearly see that people are very quick to go up to the action levels without clearing what the strategy is. And as a result, we see that different agencies, different people are pulling in different directions, and we are going nowhere. As a result, it's very, very important for the entire country to align to a single strategy. We already have a strategy. That is why I'm going to share with you today the strategy to achieve RE transition and the 70-30 policy in the planner's perspective. What I would do is, you all know that we have 2 very popular plans made by CEB, the long-term generation expansion plan, which is prepared once in 2 years for a 20-year period, and the long-term transmission development plan, which is prepared after every generation plan is approved and for a 10-year period. But you may wonder why we can't go for the renewable energy transition and government policy with these 2 plans. We cannot, because we have another thing. You have to also understand that now the generation planning cannot be done on its own. There is a very important study that is done alongside generation planning, which is called Renewable Energy Integration Study. So they go hand in hand. So whenever I say generation planning, I'm referring to both the normal traditional generation planning exercise that we have been doing for the last 4 decades, since starting from the beginning of 1980s. But now, from about 5 years back, we have coupled another very important study to the generation planning, which is Renewable Energy Integration Study. But you may wonder why we need another strategic level plan. Why can't we do with these 2? No, we cannot. It's very clear that there is a missing element down the line, which is a development plan, which is just much more details than what the generation plan and the transmission plan has. We have now done even that. We have prepared what we call the Renewable Energy Development Master Action Plan. I will call it in short as REDMAP. I will very quickly later go into details as to what this is. We have already prepared this. It's almost 80 to 90% ready. Hereafter, this will be another addition to the 3 plans that the CEB will be making in the future. This also will be another plan. Without this, we cannot go for development of RE resources. I will tell you later why. But my presentation is not about any of these 3 plans. There is a very critical element missing at the top of all these plans at the strategic level, because unless we have a strategy as to how we move forward from every planning cycle to planning cycle, we can go in different directions. For example, generation planning, as you all know, is an optimization exercise optimized within certain constrained boundaries, constrained by the policies or constrained by certain technical requirements. And it's an economic optimization. Unless we have the bigger picture in mind, that is a strategy as to how we take the country forward, it's quite likely that if we simply go for optimization from plan to plan, we may go in different directions. So it's very important to have a bigger strategic plan in mind as to how we take the country to the complete carbon neutrality. And that plan was lacking. We now have it. So I will present it to you in a short while. Second, there is another similar plan, a similar strategic plan that is required prior to the transmission development plan. I will, since I'm going to talk about it, I will not go into detail. Other thing is even though we have the red map, we have the renewable energy plan, still there has to be another strategic plan on top of that. So I will be talking about these three strategic plans in my presentation in next few minutes to come. Let me start with the generation expansion strategy for the renewable energy transition. I have a background in strategy formulation as well, though my CV was not, I could not inform the organizers. For 5 years, I was working in the corporate strategy division of CEB, and I realized the value of strategic planning and having what we call strategy maps. These are management tools, not very familiar to engineers, but extremely important when we are doing planning. So I will start what the generation expansion strategy of CEB is. This is very simple. All my presentations are quite simple. This is the strategy. For example, if I take you through this diagram, you can see that there is a diagram which is starting with the present system in 2021 and ending up in 2050, where the government want the country to be carbon neutral, not carbon zero, carbon neutral. So how are we going to take the country from 2021 to up to carbon neutrality? Let's say our country, we have a brown grid. Let's say we have a brown grid with oil and coal dominating generation. But our grid still, even though I call it a brown grid, still our average emissions are quite low. It's less than, it's about 0.5 kilograms of CO2 per kWh, which is much low by the world standards. But let's, for the time being, call it a brown grid. So how are we going to change from this brown grid, high carbon grid, into carbon neutrality? What we are going to do is we will go from brown to green through a blue portion. This blue portion belongs to liquid natural gas. We are going to use liquid natural gas only as a transition fuel. Remember this diagram, these diagrams are called strategy maps. This diagram is drawn not after we got the policy. This is much before the policy. Even the last generation plan that we have produced, which is for the period 2022 to 2041, which has been conditionally approved by the regulator, we received approval about 5 months back, was based on this strategy map. I will tell you why. So this is my planning horizon, 20 years. The 2050 carbon neutrality is beyond my planning horizon, but still when we are making plans, we have to aim for this longer target. And that is why it's very important to have a strategic map. It's very important to have the bigger picture in mind when you are going from plan to plan. So how are we going through this blue transition into this green region is a few things we have to understand. Even though a lot of people think that we can go through this transition in one single generation plan, it is not possible to do it. Our standing is that it's quite difficult to take the jump from now to the 2040 system, because there are a lot of uncertainties. We are in a highly changing world. The technology is changing very rapidly. As a result, our strategy was to go in successive generation plans, which we have been making once in every 2 years. Because from the next generation plan thereafter, when we come near to the target will be more visible to us. The technologies available will be more visible to us. We may know the exact direction the world is going. We are clearly at a crossroad. For example, to go for 70% renewable or even go for carbon neutrality, some people may think that the best strategy is to generate electricity from renewables transmit it along very high powered, high capacity transmission lines. But few years into the future, sometimes the world may change and world may go for a hydrogen economy. In a scenario like that, the best option would be to generate hydrogen using our renewables and run our conventional power plants, because already our combined cycle plants and natural gas power plants, there are technologies readily available to co-fire them with hydrogen. So since the future is uncertain and since the future is moving in very interesting directions, our strategy is somewhat flexible to accommodate these changes, right? So what, in short, what we were planning is to go from this oil and coal dominated system through LNG, but LNG to be used only as a transition fuel. Then if I take your attention to the middle period of this diagram, it's very important before you go for the transition to make the grid zero carbon ready. This period is for that. Before we go for complete green transition, synchronous power grids are not still ready for asynchronous technologies. Very high asynchronous penetration. Even the highest asynchronous penetration, I think in an islanded power grid is limited, operationally limited to about 65%. It's very difficult to go for a very high percentage of asynchronous technologies in a synchronous power grid, but technologies are coming up. We can see very promising technology trends, but our plan is, our strategy is to make the grid zero carbon ready during this period so that we can open out for more and more renewables. So that is what we were planning in this direction. Our generation plans are based on this strategy, this philosophy. And to tell you, even before the government policy, if you go through the last generation plan, we have stopped developing any new coal power development after 2030. That is the importance of having a strategy, because if we simply go for economic optimization, we would pick up more and more coal power plants right along even after 2030, because no matter what people say, still it is the cheapest thermal generating option. But we very clearly see that from the strategy map, that if we are to go for green, the coal steam technology does not complement with renewables. So as a result, even though coal steam was the lowest cost option, we compared the costs with the no coal scenario after 2030 and the normal optimized case, and we put it in writing to the approval of PUCSL to go with a plan which is slightly more expensive than the base case, which they approved. So that is the importance of having a strategy map in mind, the bigger picture in mind, because otherwise we are likely to go for the optimum solution without realizing the bigger picture. So due to the strategy map, we stopped adding new coal power plants up after 2030. But now, due to the government policy, we were prevented from building any coal power plant. Even we have to cancel the coal power plant that was in the project pipeline, the Marichole 4th unit, which we could have added to the system at a very low incremental cost, but I will not go into that detail. So I'm taking attention to this middle period. Then again, there are a lot of grid support technologies that we require to go for this transition. Going for renewables, you have to, it's like planting something on the ground. You have to prepare the ground, otherwise your seeds will not plant and they will not grow. So you have to prepare and make the ground ready for the seed to come and plant. So during this period, we are going to add a lot of grid support technologies. For example, we already have a pump storage power plant in pipeline. Yesterday, we had the site visit for those the company, shortlisted company that were doing the feasibility study. We have to add batteries also into the system. There are a lot of other features which I will talk later quickly. So these are the things that we want to do in this middle period. Then remember, LNG is only a transition fuel. We will transfer the thermal to LNG. We will build LNG capacity. That is another important thing. We are going to build LNG supply infrastructure. We are going to build LNG capacities initially, but we see that the LNG generation, the LNG duty of the plant factors of LNG power plants are drastically coming down because we have to gradually give way for renewable. As a result, even though we are going to build LNG megawatt capacity because of many reasons, many technical reasons, which I don't want to discuss now with lack of time, We will build the capacity. We are going to plan. Still, we are in the current planning cycle. So still, I cannot give you the numbers. I don't know what are the proper technologies, but it's most likely that we may have to go for technologies that can operationally complement renewables, like even IC engines, even gas turbines, even combined cycles may not fit into the picture, but we are still doing the planning study, so it's too early for me to comment. So what I'm going to say is gradually LNG will give way to renewables when the technologies are ready, when the grid is ready to get renewables into the system. Thereafter, firm the generation, at somewhere after 2030, we will stop developing even thermal capacity, because when the moment we see that the renewable technologies are ready and there are enough technologies, enabling technologies for us to take them on board to synchronous power systems, we can stop building new firm power capacity even, but we don't know what the future is. That is why I said the best way is to go for this transition from number of generation plants, not from a single generation plant. It's difficult to do that. So finally, the last portion of my generation strategy map here, it will be entirely renewable system. We don't know exactly what type of system this would be. So it's quite difficult for us to foresee, but that is what this bigger strategy map says. So that is the generation strategy map. Now I will quickly again take you to the transmission development strategy. Because this is mainly aimed at achieving the 70-30 government policy. Remember, I told you the transmission development plans are prepared for 10-year period. So we also have a transmission development strategy now in CEB. If I take a timeline like this containing years, during the first phase, our strategy is not to build any more new grid resources, not new network resources, but use the existing grid resources to absorb renewable energy, because our existing high voltage grid is capable of absorbing quite a lot of renewable energy, which we want utilized during these periods. Why? Because one thing, we have a forex crisis, we have a US dollar crisis. So without any investment, we can absorb even 500, 600 megawatts of renewable energy to our grid at places where there are renewable energy potential. Another thing you have to understand is under phase one, all these resources will be not in large parcels, but will be scattered throughout the country in small parcels in each grid substation. This has another advantage, because to develop, the local investors can come up, the small local investors can come up, and even they may be able to come up with a rupee tariff. But the moment you go for large investments like 100, 200 megawatt, it will usually the foreign investors who are coming, and we see that they ask dollar denominated tariffs. So phase one has a number of advantages of using this strategy. We use existing grid resources. We are not going to invest on new grid resources. The local investors can come up, and there is another big advantage of having small scale renewable absorption scattered throughout the country because of geographical staggering. It insulates us from the adverse weather related impacts, which is very good. So during the first phase of transmission development, we are going to use existing high voltage resource in the grid without any new investment. In addition, there are a lot of, even the low voltage network and the 33 kV distribution network can add a sizable proportion of renewable energy, particularly solar and solar rooftop. So during the first phase, we are going to use the existing grid resources, but these will come up in small numbers scattered throughout. Next phase, where we are going to augment existing grid resources. That is the next best option, because we can augment the grid with a very small incremental cost to add a large amount of megawatts. For example, to give you some numbers, by augmenting a grid substation by approximately about $13 million US, I can absorb about 100 megawatts. But if you are going for a large renewable park, for example, you must have heard about Siyambalapitiya. To add 100 megawatt from Siyambalapitiya, the dedicated grid resources itself cost about $21 million US. And even after those dedicated infrastructure is built, still we have to make some changes in the existing grid that cost an additional $20 million US. So at places like Siyambalapitiya, it had somehow come to the pipeline, don't ask me how, to get 100 megawatts, we have to spend about $40 million US, whereas the best strategy would have been to spend about $13 million US and add 100 megawatt by augmenting existing grids. The same goes, even the low voltage network, as you may know, there are a lot of problems in the low voltage network. We have problems in absorbing solar rooftop into the distribution network. The hosting capacity is limited. We call it hosting capacity. But even the distribution hosting capacity can be increased by a much smaller investment. For example, approximate number, these are only approximate numbers, don't quote me. About 100 megawatt can be obtained by spending about $10 million US by augmenting the existing distribution network. So that is how, that is at a very small incremental investment, we can add a lot of renewables in phase 2. So our phase 1, no investments for grid. Phase 2, the next best option, augment the existing grid. What is this diagram? We are now doing all these studies, all these planning, all the preparation, project preparatory work to augment the grid. This blue arrow is the period. This blue arrow is the absorption of renewable energy to this grid. For example, even starting from 2022, I have shaded. You can add quite a lot of renewable energy into this grid as we go on. And under phase 2 again, when we augment more and more grid substations, we can keep on adding more and more renewable energy into the network. This period, we are preparing for phase 2. We are preparing, getting money, doing the studies. All this is done right now to prepare for phase 2. That is the phase 2 of transmission development. Under phase 3, only the new lines and new grid substations would come up. So what we are doing now, we are doing all the planning studies now, project formulation, we are carrying out feasibility studies. There are quite a lot of pre-development work, even securing land, transmission line routes, securing funding, tendering, awarding. All this has to be done for you to get a grid with new transmission lines and new grid substations. So our strategy is to have all these lines ready to absorb renewable energy after 2026. So approximately between now and 2026, the renewable energy will be absorbed to the existing grid without any investment. And under phase 2, by augmenting the grid with minimum incremental cost. But while we are doing it, we do all these studies to launch the big lines and big substations that are coming up. Even we may have to go for 400 kV network. Also, there are certain projects that are already in the pipeline and the last stage of getting lending agency approval. There is one big project from ADB funding. There is another 120 million euro of AFD funding project coming up. All these projects will see light of the day during this period, plus new transmission infrastructure. So that is how we going to go in transmission development. There again, there's a very important thing you have to understand. Again, during this period, 24, 25, and 26, we are going to prepare the grid ready for the asynchronous, non-dispatchable, variable, non-firm RE penetration. Unless we make the grid ready, we have the batteries, we have our grid codes ready, we have our planning tools ready. Unless we have a renewable energy desk at the system control center, we go for curtailment, how to treat curtailment commercially, how to treat curtailment technologically. All these things we have to do during this period, so that by the time these transmission lines are ready and the big renewables are coming during this period, our grid is ready, transmission network is ready to absorb renewables. As per our strategy, the major renewable additions are in this portion. About to give you the numbers, this portion will have up to from now up until about 2025. We are going to absorb about 1,500 megawatts to 2,000 megawatts under these two strategies. But hereafter, our strategy is an end-loaded strategy. After 2026, our grid will be ready. Grid will be ready to go for the transmission. The new infrastructure will come up. And the major additions to go for 2030, 70% policy will be in this region after 2026. That is about 3,500 megawatts of new other renewable energy addition. So in a single diagram, this is what we call a strategy map. I can show you the entire transmission development strategy of CEB. We are going to use existing grid, augmented grid, new grid, and all the major development will be coming up after 2076. By the time we have the new RE development, new RE capacities coming in large numbers, we are going to make the grid ready. These arrows, I have not used them in different colors, not to make it look nice, but to show you the different types of studies that we are engaged in. For example, this is what we are doing now. This is my plan teams are doing all these things now, because unless we do these things, we will not be able to move to this level. So that is in a nutshell, my transmission development strategy. Then the most important thing, the third one, the renewable energy development strategy. This is, I told you, is a new addition. We didn't have this, we are doing it now. It's about 80 to 90% ready. Dr. Siyambalapitiya's RMA team is also helping us under ADB technical assistance. This is not only done by CEB's planners, it's all other teams are helping us to prepare what we call the Renewable Energy Development Master Action Plan. What is it? I will explain to you very quickly. The current Renewable Energy Development Master Action Plan, I'll call it REDMAP in short, is for the period 2022-2031. This will have all the renewable energy projects that are to come up in every year in detail. The generation plans does not have this detail, they only have the capacities, but we also need another plan that shows all the projects that are coming up, specific projects, the technology, the resource, interconnecting grid allocation, approximate geographical area, all these things are in the form of projects and will be shown in the red map that we are going to make. So the red map is prepared based on 5 principles. This is the most important thing. Now I'm going to talk about the strategy of preparing red map. This is very important because first principle is all the projects that are there in the red map, they must comply with the year-by-year renewable energy capacity that is there in the long-term generation expansion plan. That I think is simple, right? All these projects every year will adapt to the capacity that is given in the generation plan. That is rule number 1, principle number 1. Number 2, this is very important. You may not understand the importance of this, but this is very important. I can tell you many examples of many projects being forced at us, ignoring this principle. That is, all the projects that are lined up in this red map must be based on the levelized cost of electricity. For example, let's say we have 3 candidate sites. These are just example numbers, 1, 2, and 3. Each will have a levelized cost of electricity for the technology. Not forget about the tendering. This is for the technology. So if I calculate the levelized cost of electricity, the order of exploitation will not be 1, 2, and 3, but 3, 1, and 2, because there's no way that we can get a resource which has higher levelized cost of electricity when there is another site that is having a lower cost of levelized cost of electricity available. That is a violation of Electricity Act Section 17C. We have to go for the lower hanging fruits first, the cheaper ones first. So the second principle would be the projects that were lined up in the red map will be based on levelized cost of electricity. For example, even yesterday, I will not tell you the funding agency, there was some delegation came, they were talking about preparing a roadmap to develop offshore wind. Yes, one day offshore will come on board. People talking about floating solar. Yes, one day floating solar will come, not so far down in the future, but there is no way that we can absorb offshore wind just because it is interesting or just because somebody had done a feasibility study when a lot of onshore wind potential is still available at half or even less than the cost. So second principle, levelized cost of electricity. Third is very important. Every project is a result of certain pre-development activities. Different projects have different pre-development activities. So when you place a project in the timeline, you have to consider this aspect. There is no way that I can place this project somewhere in 2024 because inherently that project has longer lead time. So that is the third principle. Projects must be lined up according to the project lead time. This is a typical Gantt chart of a 100 megawatt solar project. I will not go into detail. I will explain this little further. Let's say there is a project and there are so much of pre-development activities to be done to realize the project. If I put those activities like this, and if I summarize them into a single line for the ease of presenting, this represent the pre-development activities of this project, but in a single linear line. This represents the lead time of this project. So when you are lining up projects in the red map, there is no way that there can be a project which is expensive, but having equal lead times, but we have to go for the lower levelized cost of project first. Then there can be another project which is very cheap, but has a very long development lead time. There's no way that I can place it here. It's no point, it's not practical. So that will be placed somewhere later in the timeline because of its long lead time. Again, there can be another project in between. Again, another thing you have to understand, there are so many things to discuss, but I'll not go into detail. For example, this project, we will not even start the development work until 2026. But this project, since it is cheap, we will start the development work now itself. So this is the type of action plan that we are preparing, this type of development plan that we are preparing. Then principle number 4, most important, a lot of people don't understand, a project can be accommodated into the system only when its interconnecting point is ready. A lot of people don't understand this. A lot of projects are forced and thrown at us asking for grid interconnection when the grid is not ready. Even now, I have about 400 megawatts of proposals asking for interconnection, but the transmission network development cannot be driven by investors. It must be driven by planners. We have to open the projects for investment, but things are happening other way around. Unfortunately, people are coming up with projects. They are thrown at us to give interconnection. It's not possible. Why it is not possible? For example, this is the current transmission network of the country, and this is the future transmission network of the country. Still, my planning studies are not over, but when the 2030 network is ready, we have a skeleton network done. The network will be something like this. So let's say there is a project which is coming up at a place like this. This is the new Habaram to Kapalture line, transmission line, 220 kV transmission line. The project is here. Even though it's very cheap, even though it can be developed very fast, the lead time is small, there is no way that I can place this project here in 2023 because the interconnection point is not available. I can place the project only when the interconnection point is available. That depends on the network expansion. The network expansion is depending on the three phases I discussed about earlier. That is why I said everything must be connected together. All the generation planning strategy, transmission planning strategy, and the renewable energy development plan all must be connected together to have a practical action plan which we can execute and go for this target. Otherwise, things are not done in that way. It's quite ad hoc, quite unorganized. That is why we thought of first coming up with strategies, get the approval from all agencies, line up the entire government to this strategy, and then go. Otherwise, people are very fast going up to the action level without realizing where they are going. So my fourth principle would be that we can only place a project in the red map only when the corresponding interconnection point is available. I can tell you many stories, but not enough time. Fifth principle, of course, is that we have to maintain geographical staggering when developing renewable energy resources. For example, even though transmission line is available, my new Habaram to Kapalture line is available, about 1,000 megawatts from the eastern zone, eastern renewable energy zone will be exploitable, but I cannot keep on developing the entire eastern zone and then go for the west. We have to maintain certain geographical staggering. I hope you can all understand, being engineers. So that is the renewable energy development master action plan and the 5 principles based on which renewable master action plan is developed. Now, I will tell you very quickly how the renewable energy development master action plan can actually help with achieve the government policy. This is an extremely important thing. One thing is this renewable energy development action plan identifies actions. Projects are result of certain actions. So if anybody want to monitor what is happening, or in the renewable and in the red map, we have identified not only the projects, we have lined up the projects according to all the 5 principles that I told you. We have already identified all the pre-development activities that are required to realize the project. And thereafter, once they are placed in the red map, anybody can monitor the things that are required to be done in a given year. For example, if anybody want to see that the government 70-30 target is on course, they need not worry about the projects that are coming up in future. They only need to see whether what is required to be done today are done properly. So that is what we call action plan monitoring. With this red map, all government agencies, all ministries can monitor the progress, because every action plan, all the responsible agencies are listed along with every project. Another thing is, we are going to publish red map in the web. Updated, this will be updated once in 2 years. The most important thing is, thereafter, the prospective investors now know what are the opportunities coming their way up to 2030. One of the problems with tendering is that when you float a tender only, the prospective developers can find a land, find an investor, go for a bank. The time period is not enough. But the moment you publish and let everybody know that what are the projects that are coming up, what are the locations, what are the years, what are the capacities, everything, then they can get ready to invest on these particular investments. That is one of the most important thing. With every project, we are going to have generate a project prospectus as well, right? Because the moment we identify a project in the red map, we know already upfront a lot of details, even to certain level, the resource information is also known. Other thing is, as I told you before, all the upstream pre-project development activities are also shown, and that can be used as an action plan for monitoring and executing. Other thing is, all the government agencies can be now aligned. The treasury can be aligned. They know where my new transmission development lines are coming up. When the loan disbursement take place, BOI knows where they have to come up with investors. All the government agencies now can see where the progress of the 70-30, if we have a single plan like this. Another thing is agency-wise project progress monitoring also can be done with this plan. In a nutshell, since my time is almost gone, in a nutshell, what I have told you is the strategy. I told you about the generation strategy, how we are going to go from brown to green, how we are going to prepare the grid ready for this transition here in midway, and how we are going to go for carbon neutrality. There are so many things I have to discuss, but not enough time to go into detail. Then I told you my transmission development strategy. We are going under 3 different phases. Phase 1, we are going to use existing grid resources, no US dollar investment. We can go for about 600, 700 megawatt renewable capacity, which is quite big. You may have heard about, we are talking about 100 megawatt Punarine, we are talking about 100 megawatt Siyambalapitiya. Here I am talking about 7 times that without any US dollar investment, we can get it. So we are going to go with existing grid resources for about 2-3 years. Then thereafter, we are going to augment the grid. When we do that, this period is very important. We are going to prepare the grid ready, our planning studies, our software tools, grid codes, everything to be ready, batteries to be ready, all that. So I'm going to prepare the grid ready. Thereafter, my new lines and new grid substations will come up, and major renewable energy additions to go for 2030, 70-30 target is here. So it's very clear strategy as to how we are progressing. The generation strategy is very clear, transmission strategy is very clear. Also, my renewable energy development master action plan is being prepared. We can launch it, I hope, within a couple of months. There, it's very clearly lined up all the projects so that everybody can see. They are not simply lined up the way I want. They are lined up according to 5 principles I told you. So the moment you do that, there is a principle behind what we are doing. There is a strategy, there is a philosophy, and there is a methodology behind what we do. My time is gone, so I will stop with that, and I will answer any questions. Remember, my task is not to tell you about the generation plan, but my task was to tell you about this bigger picture, the strategic element which was missing all the time, that we have now put in place. if the government, if the higher authorities agree to the strategy, I'm fairly confident we can align the entire government to this very, very tough target, right? If anybody said that this is an easy target, he doesn't know power systems. This is an extremely tough target, but still the moment the government gives us a policy, there's no way that we can say it's tough. That is not the policy we want. We as government, we have state officials, there's no way that we can do it. We will give our best try. This is one of the way of doing it. We have to go with a very good plan. And this is the strategic element of it. With that, I will stop. Thank you.